Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Nydam Sword, Denmark. The year is 1859. You're a laborer working a peat bog in southern Denmark, cutting fuel blocks the same way your family has for generations. Your spade hits something that isn't peat. It's metal. You pull, and the bog doesn't want to let go. It never does. That's the thing about a bog. It doesn't decay what falls into it. It preserves it. Perfectly. Like the earth itself is keeping evidence. What comes up is a sword. Iron. Roughly 5 feet of weapon, still sharp at the edge after more than 1,000 years underwater. Here's where it gets strange. This isn't the only thing in the bog. Archaeologists who later excavate the site, what becomes known as the Nydam Mows, pull out over 100 swords, spears, and shields. Entire boats. Thousands of weapons. The facts. The Nydam finds date to roughly 200 to 450 AD during the Iron Age. Researchers from the National Museum of Denmark determined the weapons weren't lost. They were placed. Deliberately. Many were bent, broken, or snapped in half before they went into the water. That's not how you lose a sword. That's how you kill one. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Bogs across northern Europe show the same behavior, over and over, for centuries. Weapons broken, then drowned. Some historians call it a ritual of decommissioning, a way of thanking the gods after a battle by sacrificing the very weapons that won it. But if that's true, why bend the sword first? Why not just offer it whole? Here's the theory that keeps archaeologists up at night. In several northern European traditions, a weapon that has taken a life is believed to carry something with it. Not literally, not provably, but symbolically, the weapon becomes soaked in what it did. Breaking it wasn't about destroying the metal. It was about making sure it could never be drawn again. And this wasn't the only civilization that believed a blade could carry more than steel. Number 2. The Terracotta Army's missing weapons, China. The year is 1974. You're a farmer digging a well outside Xi'an, China, when your shovel strikes something that shouldn't be there. A face. Clay. Life-sized. Staring back up at you from underground. You've just found the entrance to one of the largest archaeological discoveries in human history. The Terracotta Army of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, over 8,000 soldiers built to guard him in the afterlife. Here's where it gets strange. The soldiers were meant to be armed. Historical records and tomb design confirm that real bronze weapons, swords, crossbows, spears, were placed in their hands. But when archaeologists began excavating in the years that followed, many of the weapon pits had been burned, deliberately, and looted, likely not long after the emperor's death. Researchers from Peking University and the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology confirmed that some bronze swords recovered from the site were coated in a chromium-based treatment, a technique so advanced that similar anti-rust processes weren't developed in the West until the 20th century. After more than 2,000 years underground, the blades came out still sharp. But the weapons that survived are not the ones that matter most. It's the ones that are missing. Historical texts describe a peasant uprising that broke into the tomb complex within years of the emperor's death, allegedly melting down weapons for their own war. If true, some of the deadliest blades ever forged in ancient China are not lost. They're recirculated. Somewhere. Unidentified. Possibly still in the ground under modern Xi'an. Possibly reforged into something else centuries ago. And this is where everything changes. Emperor Qin Shi Huang's actual tomb, the central chamber where his body rests, has never been opened. Not by archaeologists, not by anyone in the modern era. Ancient historian Sima Qian, writing about a century after the emperor's death, described the tomb as rigged with crossbow traps designed to fire automatically at intruders, and a floor built as a map of China with rivers of flowing mercury. In 2020, soil samples taken from the mound showed abnormally high mercury concentrations, far above natural background levels. The traps might be a legend, the mercury is not. Nobody has opened that chamber in over 2,000 years. Not because they can't, because they've chosen not to. But mercury appears again later on this list. Number 3. The Sword and the Stone of San Galgano, Italy. The year is 1180. You're standing on a hillside in Tuscany, and a knight named Galgano Guidotti has just done something no one in the village understands. He's driven his sword into solid rock. Not sand, not soil, stone. And according to the accounts later recorded by the Catholic Church, the blade sank into it as if it were driving into wood. Here's where it gets strange. That sword is still there, today. In a small stone rotunda outside Siena, tourists can walk up and see the hilt of a 12th century sword protruding from bedrock, exactly where legend says Galgano renounced his life as a soldier and became a hermit. In 2001, researchers from the University of Pavia conducted metallurgical analysis on the blade. Their conclusion: the sword's style and metal composition were consistent with the 12th century, the same era Galgano supposedly lived. This wasn't a medieval fake planted centuries later, it matched. Ground-penetrating radar later revealed something beneath the chapel floor, a hollow chamber roughly the size of a human body, right where local legend says Galgano is buried. But that wasn't the disturbing part. In the 1960s, the sword was vandalized, snapped off at the hilt by someone who wanted a piece of it. It was later restored and reattached. Here's the detail almost nobody talks about. Church records from the centuries after Galgano's death describe two men who tried to remove the sword from the stone by force, intending to steal it or destroy it. Both men, according to the accounts, died shortly after. One supposedly torn apart by wolves, the other struck by lightning. Coincidence? Almost certainly. But the pattern of "those who try to draw it suffer" doesn't stay in Italy. It shows up in nearly every culture that buries a weapon in stone or ground. Why does the warning keep repeating, independently, across civilizations that never had contact with each other? That question doesn't have an answer yet, but the next place was sealed for a very different reason. Number 4. The Sutton Hoo Ghost Sword, England. The year is 1939. You're an amateur archaeologist named Basil Brown, and you've been hired to investigate strange mounds on a private estate in Suffolk, England. You expect pottery, maybe some coins. Instead, you find the outline of an entire ship, buried in sand for over 1,000 years, the wood long since rotted away, but its shape perfectly preserved as a ghost in the soil. At the center of the burial chamber, a warrior, or at least where a warrior used to be. The body itself had completely dissolved in the acidic soil, leaving nothing behind but position, the outline of where a man once lay, surrounded by his possessions. Here's where it gets strange. Beside him, a sword. Pattern welded, meaning the blade was forged by folding and twisting different types of iron together, an advanced and labor-intensive technique for the era. The sword's hilt was decorated with gold and garnet, marking it as belonging to someone of extraordinary status. The facts? Researchers from the British Museum date the Sutton Hoo ship burial to the early 7th century, and many believe it belonged to Radwald, king of East Anglia. It remains one of the richest Anglo-Saxon burials ever discovered. But the sword raised a question nobody expected. Analysis showed the blade had never been used in combat. No nicks, no repairs, no wear patterns consistent with battle. A king's sword, never drawn. Why bury a weapon that was never used to kill, with the same ceremonial weight as one that had? One theory: the sword wasn't a weapon at all in the practical sense. It was a symbol of authority, power itself, forged into a blade so it could be buried alongside its owner and never wielded by anyone else again. But if that's true, why make it sharp? Why make it real? The chamber offered no answer, just the outline of a man and a sword that was built to kill but never allowed to. And this wasn't the last time archaeologists would find a weapon deliberately kept from ever being used. Number 5. The Viking Sword of Ulfberht, Northern Europe. The year is 2012. You're a material scientist examining a Viking Age sword recovered from a riverbed in Germany. And something about the blade doesn't add up. Inscribed along the fuller, the central groove of the blade, are 6 letters: Ulfberht. Here's where it gets strange. This isn't one sword. It's a name that appears on more than 170 swords found across Europe, spanning roughly 200 years, from the 9th to 11th centuries. Metallurgical testing conducted for a Nova/National Geographic investigation found that genuine Ulfberht blades were forged from crucible steel, a nearly pure, high-carbon steel with almost no slag impurities. This type of steel wasn't being produced in Europe at the time. The closest known source was thousands of miles away, likely originating from the Islamic world via trade routes through Russia. For medieval Europe to access steel of that purity at that time would require trade networks historians didn't think existed yet. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Roughly a third of the Ulfberht swords tested turned out to be fakes, lower-quality iron stamped with the same name, made by smiths trying to imitate the real thing without the technology to back it up. In battle, these counterfeits were far more likely to bend or shatter. Someone, somewhere, was forging weapons with technology centuries ahead of their time. And then someone else was faking that name, selling inferior copies to warriors who had no way of knowing the difference. Who was Ulfberht? A single smith? A dynasty of smiths passing down the name? A trade guild protecting a secret? No definitive answer has ever been found. The name simply stops appearing in the historical record after the 11th century. The source of the steel and the identity behind the mark vanished with it. But mercury and hidden metallurgy weren't finished making appearances on this list either. Number 6. The Cursed Dagger of Tutankhamun, Egypt. The year is 1925. You're part of Howard Carter's excavation team, 3 years into cataloging the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, when you unwrap the linen bindings around the young pharaoh's mummified body. Tucked at his waist, a dagger. Its blade doesn't look like bronze. It looks untouched by 3,000 years underground. No rust, no corrosion, gleaming as if it were forged yesterday. Here's where it gets strange. Bronze corrodes, iron rusts. In ancient Egypt, iron was rarer than gold, reserved almost exclusively for ceremonial and religious objects. A functioning iron blade, buried around 1323 BC, should not have survived in this condition. In 2016, a team from Milan Polytechnic and Pisa University used X-ray fluorescent spectrometry to analyze the dagger's composition. The blade contained high levels of nickel and cobalt in a ratio consistent with meteoritic iron, meaning the metal fell from the sky before it was ever forged. Ancient Egyptians had a term for iron, bi-npt. Translated literally, it means iron of the sky. They knew. Long before modern science confirmed it, someone in ancient Egypt understood that this particular metal came from beyond the earth. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The dagger was never sharpened for use. Analysis suggests it was ceremonial from the moment it was forged, a weapon shape, built with a substance considered divine, meant to accompany the pharaoh into the afterlife, rather than be used by the living. Why give a teenage king, dead under still debated circumstances, a blade forged from a falling star? Tutankhamun died around age 19. The cause remains disputed to this day. Genetic studies conducted in 2010 revealed evidence of severe malaria and a possible bone disorder, but conspiracy around his death has never fully gone away. A weapon made from the heavens, buried with a king whose death still isn't fully explained. And this wasn't the only tomb where the metal itself seemed to matter more than the blade. Number 7. The Samurai Swords of the Sealed Shrine, Japan. The year is 1878. You're a British researcher named William Gowland, invited to survey a series of ancient burial mounds, kofun, scattered across the Japanese countryside. One in particular catches your attention. A massive keyhole-shaped mound, larger than most palaces of its era, believed to hold an emperor. You are not allowed to open it. Here's where it gets strange. The Imperial Household Agency of Japan maintains control over more than 890 kofun tombs believed to be the resting places of ancient emperors. And to this day, most remain legally off-limits to archaeological excavation. The largest of these, the Daisen Kofun, attributed to Emperor Nintoku and dated to the 5th century, is surrounded by a moat and closed to researchers by imperial decree. Limited surveys conducted jointly by the agency and outside archaeologists in 2018 confirmed cylindrical clay structures called haniwa along the mound's surface. But the central chamber, and whatever weapons or remains lie inside it, has not been examined by independent scientists in the modern era. Historical texts and smaller excavated kofun from the same period describe iron swords, ceremonial spears, and armor buried alongside the dead, often deliberately damaged before burial, mirroring the same killed weapon pattern found in the Danish bogs. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The reasoning behind the closure isn't archaeological, it's religious. The Imperial Household Agency maintains that these are active spiritual sites, resting places of ancestors connected to the current imperial line, and that disturbing them would be a violation, not a discovery. An entire modern government in the 21st century actively choosing not to know what's inside. What weapons lie in the largest tomb complex on Earth, larger by footprint than the Great Pyramid of Giza? Nobody currently alive has seen them, and this wasn't the last government to make that choice. Number 8. The Buried Blades of the Scythians, Siberia. The year is 1993. You're an archaeologist named Natalia Polosmak, working in the Ukok Plateau of Siberia, one of the coldest and most remote regions on Earth. You open a burial mound and find something the permafrost has kept in near-perfect condition for over 2,400 years. A young woman, elaborately tattooed, buried with 6 horses and a set of weapons. She becomes known as the Siberian Ice Maiden. Here's where it gets strange. Beside her, a short iron dagger and a battle axe, both placed with unusual ceremony for what appears to be, based on skeletal analysis, a woman in her mid-20s. Nomadic Scythian warriors were known from Greek historical accounts, including the writings of Herodotus, to include female fighters among their ranks, which modern archaeology has increasingly confirmed. Researchers from the Russian Academy of Sciences Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography determined the woman likely died from breast cancer, possibly compounded by a fall from a horse. Her body had been preserved through natural mummification inside a sealed larch coffin, further protected by ice that formed inside the tomb and never fully melted. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Local Altai communities strongly opposed her excavation and removal, believing she was a guardian spirit meant to seal a supernatural boundary, and that disturbing her would release something. In the years following her removal to a research facility in Novosibirsk, the Altai region experienced a series of earthquakes, unusual weather, and outbreaks of illness. Regional authorities faced mounting public pressure, and in 2012, nearly 20 years after her discovery, her remains were returned to the region and reburied near the original site. A government complying with a warning it didn't officially believe. Why return her if the belief was dismissed as superstition? What does an official research institute know or fear that it isn't saying publicly? Her weapons remain in a museum. She does not. And she wasn't the only warrior whose grave came with instructions to leave it alone. Number 9. The Spear of the Celtic Bog Warrior, Ireland. The year is 2003. You're part of a peat harvesting crew in County Offaly, Ireland, when the machinery grinds to a halt. Something has jammed the blades. When you clear the debris, you find not wood, not stone, but a body. Leather skin, still intact after more than 2,000 years in the bog's oxygen-starved chemistry. He becomes known as Old Krogan Man. Here's where it gets strange. Radiocarbon dating places his death between 362 and 175 BC. Standing at an estimated 6 feet 6 inches, he would have towered over most people of his era. His hands showed no signs of manual labor, smooth, uncalloused, suggesting a person of high status. He did not die peacefully. Researchers at the National Museum of Ireland documented that he had been stabbed, had his nipples cut, and was cut in half at the torso before being placed in the bog, deliberately weighted down with hazel branches woven through his arms. In Celtic tradition, sucking a king's nipples was reportedly a gesture of submission and loyalty. Mutilating them, some archaeologists believe, may have been a symbolic way of stripping someone of the right to rule. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Old Krogan Man was found alongside multiple other bog bodies across Ireland, several near ancient territorial boundaries, many showing similarly ritualistic overkill violence, far more wounds than necessary to cause death. Archaeologist Ned Kelly, former keeper of Irish antiquities at the National Museum, proposed a theory. These weren't murder victims or war casualties. They were failed or rejected kings, ritually executed and placed at territorial borders as a kind of magical seal, a sacrifice meant to protect and bless the land. Weapons believed associated with several of these sites were never recovered intact, deliberately broken, deliberately scattered. The same pattern again, an object connected to violence and power, disassembled and hidden so it could never function again. Border after border, body after body. The land itself seemingly treated as something that needed to be sealed. What was being kept out? Or what was being kept in? That question leads to the final entry on this list, and it's the most recent and least explained of them all. Number 10. The Unnamed Blade, Central Asia, 2016. The year is 2016. You're part of a joint archaeological survey working in a remote mountain region of Central Asia, in a location the research team has asked publications not to specify precisely, citing concerns about looting. You're excavating what appears to be a small, isolated tomb. No grand architecture, no elaborate markings, just a single stone slab covering a shaft cut directly into rock. Here's where it gets strange. Beneath the slab, a single sword wrapped in decayed cloth, no skeleton beside it. Just the weapon, alone, sealed in a space clearly built specifically to contain it and nothing else. The facts. Preliminary metallurgical analysis, shared informally at a regional archaeology conference but not yet published in a peer-reviewed journal, suggested a composite construction, layered metals of differing origin, folded together in a manner inconsistent with known local smithing traditions of the estimated era. Carved into the stone slab covering the shaft, a series of symbols. Some were identifiable as belonging to a regional script used in the area over 1,000 years ago. Others have not been matched to any known writing system. One symbol, repeated 3 times, was later interpreted by 2 independent linguists, working separately without communicating with each other, as carrying the same rough meaning. Not this one. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The research team removed the sword for further study. Within 18 months, the excavation permit for the region was quietly revoked by local authorities, citing land use disputes unrelated to archaeology. Requests for follow-up access have gone unanswered. The sword itself is reportedly being held in a research facility, but its current institutional custody has not been made public, and no peer-reviewed paper describing it in full has been released as of this recording. A weapon. A warning carved in a language we can only partially read, and a research trail that goes quiet almost as soon as it starts. What was the danger? Who set it? And why does the pattern, bury it, break it, warn against it, keep repeating across every culture that ever built a blade? We still don't know. 10 weapons, 10 warnings, 10 civilizations that never spoke to each other, separated by oceans and centuries, arriving at the same conclusion independently. Some things, once drawn, should not be drawn again. Maybe it's superstition, a pattern humans repeat because fear is universal, and burying a broken sword feels safer than burying a working one. Or maybe some of these people understood something about power and violence and consequence that we've simply stopped listening to. A blade is just metal. It doesn't remember what it's done. But the people who buried them clearly believed something did. Every civilization on this list made the same choice, in different ways, at different times. Take the weapon out of the world, break it, seal it in stone, sink it in water, bury it beside a body, and warn the next person not to touch it. They didn't destroy these weapons, they imprisoned them. And whether you believe there was ever anything to fear, a curse, a spirit, a consequence we don't have a name for, one fact remains true across every single site on this list. Nobody who buried these weapons ever came back for them. The sword is still in the stone. The mercury is still there. The chamber remains sealed. Someone knew something, and they decided the rest of us didn't need to. If this kept you watching until the end, you already know there are more doors like this scattered across the world. Some we haven't found yet, and some we found and chosen, quietly, not to open. Subscribe, because the next one might be the door that finally gets opened.